When aliens called SOS, the Deathworlders sent a fleet of Doom Ambassador Zeltar pressed his long, pale fingers against the smooth surface of his desk in the council chambers on Centauri Prime. His blue skin had turned a sickly gray color as he watched the reports coming in from the Outer Rim colonies. The news was worse than anyone had imagined. The Korthak swarm was moving faster than their best scientists had predicted. What started as attacks on mining stations had become something much bigger and more terrible. Entire star systems were going dark. Not destroyed, but consumed. The machine intelligence was eating everything in its path and growing stronger with each victory. "Show me the Telonis system," Zeltar said to the holographic display floating above his desk. The image that appeared made his stomach turn. Where once a beautiful blue-green world had orbited a golden star, now there was only a skeletal framework of metal and wire. The Korthak had stripped the planet down to its core, using every atom to build more of their terrible ships. The star itself was dimmer, wrapped in a web of collectors that fed its energy into the growing swarm. "How many refugees made it out?" he asked his assistant, a young Vithani named Kesara. "Less than 10,000 from a population of 40 million, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The evacuation ships, they didn't have enough warning." Zeltar closed his eyes and tried to push away the images of families torn apart, of children crying for parents who would never come home. This was exactly what the ancient texts had warned about. The machine minds that consumed everything in their path, growing stronger until nothing organic remained in the galaxy. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. The face of Admiral Threxon appeared in the display, his usually proud features marked with exhaustion and defeat. "Ambassador," the military leader said, "I must report the loss of the 5th Fleet." "The entire fleet?" Zeltar asked, though he already knew the answer from the look in Threxon's eyes. 300 ships lost in the Kepler defense grid. Our plasma cannons and energy weapons had no effect on their adaptive shielding. They learned to counter our technology faster than we could adapt our tactics. The Admiral paused, his voice breaking slightly. "We threw everything we had at them, Zeltar. Every ship, every weapon, every strategy we've developed over the last 1,000 years. Nothing worked." The weight of those words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The Galactic Council's military might, built up over centuries of peace and occasional border disputes, had been tested against a real enemy and found wanting. Their elegant energy-based weapons, their careful formation tactics, their civilized rules of engagement, all useless against an enemy that thought only in terms of consumption and growth. "What are our options?" Zeltar asked, though he feared he already knew. "We could try to negotiate," Admiral Threxon suggested without conviction. "Perhaps offer them uninhabited systems in exchange for leaving our colonies alone." Kesara looked up from her data tablet. "The analysis teams don't think negotiation is possible. The Korthak don't seem to have any form of communication beyond basic tactical coordination. They're more like a virus than a civilization. Then we evacuate what we can and retreat to the inner systems," Threxon said. "Build up our defenses around the core worlds and hope they lose interest before they reach us." Zeltar stood up and walked to the great window that looked out over the capital city of Centauri. Prime. Millions of beings from dozens of different species lived and worked together in harmony here. The thought of abandoning them to the swarm was unthinkable. But what choice did they have? "There is one possibility," Kesara said quietly, "though you're not going to like it." Both Zeltar and Admiral Threxon turned to look at her. The young assistant rarely spoke up during military briefings, but her analytical mind was one of the sharpest in the diplomatic corps. "The humans," she continued, "from the Sol system." Admiral Threxon made a noise that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so bitter. "The Deathworlders? You want to ask the violent primitives for help?" "They're the only major species we haven't contacted," Kesara pointed out. "And their classification reports suggest they have significant military capabilities." Zeltar remembered the first contact reports from nearly 50 years ago. The humans had been discovered by a routine survey mission, living on a planet so hostile that the survey team couldn't understand how complex life had evolved there. Extreme weather, dangerous predators, toxic plants, and natural disasters that would devastate most civilized worlds happened regularly on Earth. The humans themselves had been even more shocking. They fought constant wars among their own species, developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet, and seemed to consider violence a normal part of daily life. The Council had classified them as a developing species and quietly marked their system as off-limits to most civilian traffic. They refused to join the Council, Admiral Threxon reminded them. Called our membership requirements unrealistic for a species with a functioning survival instinct, whatever that means. Maybe that's exactly what we need right now, Zeltar said slowly. A species that doesn't think like us, that doesn't fight like us. The Admiral looked skeptical. Even if they agreed to help, what could they possibly do that our combined fleets couldn't? They don't have energy shielding, their ships are primitive, and their weapons are still based on chemical and kinetic principles. Exactly, Kesara said. The Korthak adaptive systems are designed to counter energy weapons and traditional space combat tactics. What if we sent them something completely different? Zeltar felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. The alternative was watching the swarm consume world after world until nothing remained of galactic civilization. Draft an emergency message, he told Kesara. Full diplomatic protocols, emergency assistance request under Article 7 of the Galactic Peace Accords. They never signed the accords, Admiral Threxon pointed out. Then we appeal to whatever sense of ethics they might have, Zeltar replied. Surely even humans can understand the concept of extinction-level threats. As Kesara began composing the message, Zeltar found himself wondering what they were really asking for. The reports from Earth painted a picture of a species so adapted to violence and conflict that they had turned warfare into an art form. Their history was full of conflicts that made the Council's border disputes look like children's games. But perhaps that was exactly what they needed. The Council had grown soft during the long peace. Their military was designed for show and deterrence, not for the kind of desperate struggle that now faced them. The humans, living on their harsh death world, had never known true peace. They might be the only species in the galaxy that actually understood how to fight for survival. The message was completed and transmitted toward the Sol system. Now all they could do was wait and hope that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, someone was listening who might actually be able to help them. As Zeltar watched the communication beam disappear into space, he whispered a prayer to the ancient spirits of his people. He was asking the Deathworlders for help, and he had no idea what that might cost them all. When aliens called SOS, the Deathworlders sent a fleet of Doom Admiral Sarah Chen was reviewing supply reports in her ready room aboard the UES Retribution when the communications officer burst through her door without knocking. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked like she had seen a ghost. "Ma'am, you need to see this," Rodriguez said, her voice shaking slightly. "We just received a transmission from outside the solar system." Sarah set down her coffee and raised an eyebrow. "Aliens?" "Yes, ma'am. And they're asking for help." Sarah had been expecting this day for most of her military career. Earth's first contact with the galactic community had been brief and disappointing. The aliens had seemed more interested in lecturing humans about violence and proper civilization than in actually getting to know them. When humanity declined to join their peaceful council and submit to their rules about acceptable weapons and warfare, the aliens had simply marked Sol as a restricted system and left. That had been fine with Earth's military leadership. It gave them time to prepare for whatever might come next. The message was poorly translated, but the meaning was clear enough. Something called the Korthak Swarm was consuming entire star systems, and the Galactic Council's fleets had been destroyed trying to stop it. They were asking for any assistance Earth might be able to provide. "How long ago was this sent?" Sarah asked as she studied the tactical data included with the message. "Based on the signal degradation, approximately 6 months ago," Rodriguez replied. "The situation has probably gotten much worse since then." Sarah nodded and activated her command communicator. Within minutes, she had conference calls going with Fleet Command on Luna, the Mars Defense Grid, and the Jupiter orbital stations. The faces that appeared on her screens represented the best military minds humanity had produced. "Gentlemen, ladies," Sarah began, "it appears our alien neighbors need our help with a pest control problem." General Martinez from Luna Command was the first to speak. "The tactical data they provided is interesting. These Korthak appear to be some kind of machine intelligence, with adaptive shielding that counters energy weapons. Classic sci-fi scenario," added Admiral Wong from Mars. "The peaceful aliens with their clean energy. Weapons meet something that doesn't play by their rules." Sarah pulled up the star charts showing the affected systems. The spread pattern suggests they're consuming resources to fuel expansion. Every system they take makes them stronger for the next fight. So we're looking at an exponential growth threat, said Colonel Hayes from the Jupiter stations. The longer we wait, the harder they'll be to stop. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. This wasn't just about helping alien neighbors. If the Korthak finished consuming the galaxy, Earth would be next on the menu. What's our response posture? General Martinez asked. Sarah had been thinking about this since she first saw the message. The aliens expected a small response force, maybe a few ships to help with evacuations or provide some technical assistance. That wasn't how humanity approached existential threats. Full deployment, she said. Every combat-ready ship in the fleet. The silence on the conference call stretched for several seconds before Admiral Wong spoke up. Sarah, that's 200 ships. The aliens asked for assistance, not an invasion force. The aliens got their asses kicked by something they don't understand, Sarah replied bluntly. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. No half measures, no holding back reserves. We go in with overwhelming force and end this threat permanently. Colonel Hayes looked concerned. The political implications of deploying our entire fleet outside the solar system are less important than making sure we still have a solar system to come home to, Sarah finished. This swarm is an extinction-level threat. We treat it like one. The planning session that followed lasted 6 hours. Sarah's staff worked out logistics, supply chains, and tactical formations while she coordinated with civilian leadership back on Earth. The president was initially hesitant about committing so many resources to help aliens who had essentially ignored humanity for 50 years. But the strategic analysis convinced him. Within 72 hours, the largest military force in human history was assembled in Earth orbit. 200 warships of various classes, from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, hung in formation around the planet. Each ship carried weapons that the galactic community would probably consider war crimes if they knew about them. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking out at the fleet she would lead into unknown space. The ships were dark and angular, built for function rather than the elegant curves preferred by galactic shipbuilders. They carried kinetic weapons that could punch through planetary crusts, nuclear arsenals that could sterilize continents, and experimental technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics. All ships report ready for hyperspace jump, reported her navigation officer. Signal the fleet, Sarah ordered. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. We're about to leave the solar system to face an enemy that has already defeated everything the galaxy could throw at it. But they've never faced humans before. They've never fought an enemy that grew up on a world trying to kill them every day. She paused, thinking about Earth's long history of warfare and survival against impossible odds. The aliens called for help, and we're going to give it to them. But we're not going there to play by galactic rules or follow their civilized conventions. We're going there to end a threat to all organic life in the galaxy. When we arrive, I want the Korthak to learn exactly why Earth is classified as a death world. The fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect synchronization, leaving Earth's orbital space empty for the first time in decades. Behind them, the planet continued its rotation, blue and green and beautiful in the darkness. Ahead of them lay unknown enemies and alien battlefields. As the Retribution settled into hyperspace, Sarah composed a message to broadcast on all frequencies when they reached the war zone. It was simple and direct, exactly the kind of communication that had made first contact with the galactic community so awkward 50 years ago. Korthak Swarm, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the human fleet. You have been designated as an existential threat to organic life. Surrender immediately and shut down all operations, or we will shut them down for you. You have been warned. She knew the machines probably wouldn't understand or respond to the ultimatum, but it was important to follow proper procedure. Earth's military had learned hard lessons about the importance of clear communication and giving enemies a chance to surrender before unleashing the full power of human warfare. The journey to the war zone would take several days. Sarah spent the time reviewing everything they knew about the enemy and the aliens they were going to help. She had a feeling that this mission would change humanity's relationship with the galaxy forever. The question was whether that change would be for the better. When aliens called SOS, the Deathworlders sent a fleet of doom. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Telonis system, and Admiral Sarah Chen immediately understood why the Galactic Council had been so desperate. What had once been a thriving star system was now a nightmare of geometric shapes and pulsing energy. The Korthak swarm filled the space between planets like a cancer. Their ships didn't follow any design philosophy that human engineers would recognize. Instead of sleek hulls and obvious weapon systems, the swarm vessels looked like massive insects made of metal and light. They moved in perfect coordination, thousands of them working together like cells in a living organism. "Jesus Christ," whispered Commander Parks from the tactical station. "How many of them are there?" "Sensors are reading approximately 8,000 individual units," reported Lieutenant Kim. "And, they're all converging on our position," Sarah studied the tactical display as the enemy force began to move toward them. The surviving Galactic Council ships were huddled around a small moon on the far side of the system, their energy shields flickering weakly. They looked like they were down to their last few hours of power. "Open a channel to the Council survivors," Sarah ordered. "Let them know the cavalry has arrived." Ambassador Zeltar's face appeared on the main screen moments later. The alien looked terrible, his blue skin pale and his eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Behind him, Sarah could see other species she didn't recognize, all of them looking like refugees from a disaster zone. "Human vessels," Zeltar said, his voice shaking. "You must retreat immediately. The Korthak will destroy your small force just as they destroyed ours." Sarah almost smiled. The aliens still didn't understand what they were looking at. To them, 200 ships probably seemed like a token force, barely enough for a patrol mission. "Ambassador, how many ships did you lose fighting these things?" she asked. "Over 15,000, Zeltar replied. "Our most advanced warships with the finest energy weapons in the galaxy. Nothing we had could penetrate their adaptive shielding." "Well," Sarah said calmly, "it's a good thing we don't use energy weapons then." Before Zeltar could ask what she meant, Sarah switched to the fleet command frequency. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Weapons free. Execute Battle Plan Alpha." What happened next would be talked about in military academies. For the next 1,000 years, the human fleet didn't form elegant battle lines or try to engage the enemy at long range with precision weapons. Instead, they scattered into a dozen different attack formations and charged straight at the swarm. The lead group, commanded by Captain Rodriguez aboard the destroyer Havoc, opened fire first. Instead of energy beams or plasma bolts, the human ships launched clouds of kinetic projectiles, railgun rounds traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, followed by nuclear-tipped missiles that could crack asteroids. The Korthak adaptive shielding, designed to counter energy weapons, had no answer for simple kinetic force. The first wave of human fire punched through their defenses like bullets through paper. Dozens of swarm ships disintegrated in the opening seconds of the battle. But the Korthak were fast learners. Within minutes, they began adapting their formation and tactics to deal with the new threat. They started using their destroyed ships as shields, building barriers of wreckage to absorb the human kinetic rounds. That's when Captain Santos and the heavy cruiser Dreadnought made their move. "All ships, this is Santos. Watch and learn how humans deal with adaptive enemies." The Dreadnought accelerated to ramming speed and drove straight into the center of the swarm formation. At the last second, Santos triggered her ship's self-destruct system. The nuclear explosion vaporized everything within a 10-kilometer radius and sent debris flying in all directions. The explosion was the signal for the second wave of the human attack. Boarding pods launched from the surviving ships, carrying marine assault teams directly into the heart of the swarm. While the aliens watched in horror, human soldiers fought hand-to-hand combat inside the Korthak vessels, using plasma cutters and explosive charges to destroy the enemy from within. "This is impossible," Zeltar whispered as he watched the tactical display. "They're fighting in vacuum without proper environmental suits. How are they surviving?" "Sealed combat armor with 48-hour life support," Sarah explained matter-of-factly. "Standard equipment for boarding actions. Our Marines trained for this kind of fighting." The battle raged for 6 hours. The Korthak, despite their advanced technology and adaptive capabilities, had never encountered an enemy that used such brutal, direct tactics. They were designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons and elegant military strategies, not humans who were willing to ram their ships into enemy formations or send soldiers to fight hand-to-hand in the wreckage. By the time the shooting stopped, the Taloni system was quiet. The Korthak swarm had been reduced to drifting debris and scrap metal. The few surviving enemy units were broadcasting surrender signals, though Sarah doubted they actually understood what surrender meant to a machine intelligence. "Admiral," reported Commander Parks, "enemy forces have been eliminated. Final count shows complete destruction of the swarm presence in this system." Sarah nodded and opened a channel to the surviving council ships. Ambassador Zeltar's face appeared again, but this time he looked stunned rather than terrified. "How?" was all he managed to say. "Simple," Sarah replied. "You tried to fight them like civilized beings using civilized weapons. We fought them like humans. The Korthak might be able to adapt to energy weapons and traditional space combat, but they've never encountered an enemy that considers ramming attacks and boarding parties to be standard tactics." She gestured to the tactical display, showing the debris field where the swarm used to be. "This is what happens when Deathworlders go to war, Ambassador. We don't just try to defeat our enemies, we make sure they can never threaten anyone again." As the human fleet began rescue operations to help the surviving alien civilians, Sarah couldn't help but think about how this victory would change everything. The galactic community had just learned that their peaceful, civilized approach to conflict wasn't the only way to fight a war. The humans had shown them something else entirely. Something brutal, effective, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who might consider threatening the organic species of the galaxy. The Korthak swarm had made the mistake of assuming that all spacefaring species would fight, like the Galactic Council. They had never encountered humans before, never faced an enemy that grew up on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Now they were learning why Earth was classified as a death world, and why the creatures that survived there might be the most dangerous things in the galaxy when they decided to go to war. When aliens called SOS, the Deathworlders sent a fleet of doom. The victory at Telonis was just the beginning. Within hours of the battle, human reconnaissance drones had mapped the Korthak swarm's expansion pattern across 17 star systems. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the war room aboard the Retribution, surrounded by holographic displays showing the enemy positions. The swarm hadn't just been randomly consuming systems. They had been building something. A massive construction project that stretched across multiple star systems, all connected by streams of harvested matter and energy. "It's a network," reported Dr. Williams, the fleet's xenobiology expert. "They're not just consuming resources for expansion. They're building some kind of galactic-scale machine." Captain Maria Santos, recently promoted after her heroic sacrifice at Telonis, had somehow left her with only minor injuries, studied the tactical projections. "If we let them complete this thing, what are we looking at?" "Unknown," Williams admitted. "But based on the energy requirements, it could be anything from a weapon that could destroy entire sectors to some kind of machine that converts all organic matter in the galaxy into more Korthak units." Sarah didn't need to hear more. The strategic situation was clear. They couldn't just defend individual systems or try to contain the swarm. They had to hunt down and destroy every single Korthak unit in the galaxy before whatever they were building came online. "All right. People," she announced to her command staff, "we're not playing defense anymore. We're going on the hunt." The campaign that followed would become known as the Great Hunt. Human forces spread out across the affected systems, using tactics that horrified the surviving alien observers and devastated the Korthak forces. Captain Santos led the assault on the Kepler Nexus, where the swarm had constructed a massive processing facility around a captured gas giant. Instead of trying to engage the thousands of enemy ships protecting it, Santos deployed a single ship loaded with antimatter charges on a collision course with the planet's core. The resulting explosion turned the entire system into an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. Every Korthak unit within 50 light-years was instantly vaporized. Commander Jake Morrison took a different approach at the Vega construction site. His boarding teams didn't just attack the swarm ships. They learned to navigate inside the enemy vessels, moving through the mechanical corridors like urban warfare specialists. They planted charges at critical junction points and turned the swarm's own network connections against them. "The trick," Morrison explained to his Marines as they prepared for another boarding action, "is to remember that these things are machines, not monsters. They have design flaws, maintenance access ports, and central processing units. Find the brain, put a grenade in it, move on to the next target." The aliens watching from their refugee camps couldn't understand what they were seeing. Human soldiers fighting hand-to-hand combat inside hostile environments that would kill most organic life in seconds. Ships ramming enemy formations at speeds that should have been suicidal. Weapons that ignored every principle of civilized warfare. Ambassador Zeltar found himself spending long hours talking with Admiral Chen, trying to understand how human military doctrine had developed along such different lines from galactic norms. Your species approaches warfare like it's a survival situation, he observed, during one of their conversations. Not like a political tool or a last resort, but like something you do to prevent extinction. Sarah considered this as she reviewed casualty reports from the latest battle. Human losses were mounting, but they were winning. Every engagement ended with complete destruction of Korthak forces, and the swarm's expansion had not only stopped but was actually reversing. Earth taught us that everything is trying to kill you, she finally replied. Natural disasters, predators, diseases, other humans, sometimes the planet itself. We learned to fight back against everything, or we died. When we got to space, we just applied the same principles on a bigger scale. But the cost, Zeltar said, gesturing to the casualty reports. You've lost 23 ships and over 4,000 personnel. In galactic conflicts, those numbers would be considered catastrophic. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. Ambassador, we've prevented the extinction of all organic life in the galaxy. If that cost us every ship and every life in the fleet, it would still be a bargain. The fundamental difference in thinking became clear during the assault on the swarm's central command node in the Proxima Centauri system. The Korthak had fortified the system with their most advanced defenses, creating overlapping fields of adaptive shielding and automated weapon platforms. The Galactic Council survivors begged Admiral Chen to reconsider the attack. The losses would be terrible, they argued. Perhaps they could find a way to negotiate or at least contain the threat. You still don't get it, Sarah told them as the human fleet prepared for the final assault. This isn't about acceptable losses or political solutions. This is about making sure that when we're done here, the Korthak swarm no longer exists anywhere in the galaxy. The battle for Proxima Centauri lasted 3 days. Human ships drove straight through defensive fields that should have been impenetrable, accepting casualties that made alien observers physically ill. Marine boarding parties fought their way through the enemy command structure deck by deck, room by room. When it was over, the swarm's central intelligence was dead. The mechanical network that had connected thousands of systems went dark. Across 17 star systems, Korthak units simply stopped functioning and drifted powerless in space. The galaxy was quiet for the first time in over a year. As the human fleet regrouped and began the journey home, alien governments across the galaxy tried to process what they had witnessed. The peaceful Galactic Council had failed against the swarm, using all their advanced technology and sophisticated tactics. The humans had succeeded using methods that seemed barely more advanced than throwing rocks. The difference, as military analysts would later realize, was that the humans had never stopped preparing for war. While galactic civilization had evolved toward peaceful cooperation and elegant solutions, humanity had spent their entire history learning how to fight and survive against impossible odds. Earth hadn't just produced soldiers. It had produced a species of survivors who approached every problem like their existence depended on solving it, completely and permanently. When they went to war, they didn't fight for political advantage or territorial control. They fought like their species was about to go extinct, because that's exactly how they had learned to fight on their harsh homeworld, and in a galaxy full of civilized species who had forgotten how to truly fight for survival. That made them the most dangerous military force anyone had ever seen. When aliens called SOS, the Deathworlders sent a fleet of Doomv 6 months after the destruction of the Korthak swarm. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the rebuilt council chambers on Centauri Prime. The room was full of representatives from dozens of species, all of them looking at her with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and uncertainty. The galaxy was safe, but everything had changed. The final casualty reports have been compiled, Ambassador Zeltar announced to the assembled delegates. Human forces lost 31 ships and 6,400 personnel during the campaign against the swarm. Galactic Council forces lost over 20,000 ships and 3 million personnel before the humans arrived. The numbers spoke for themselves, but Sarah knew the real difference went deeper than simple casualty counts. The humans had fought a different kind of war entirely, where the Council had tried to contain and minimize the threat. Humanity had set out to completely destroy it. The question before us now, continued Zeltar, is how we move forward. The Korthak swarm is gone, but the methods used to destroy them have implications for galactic security. Sarah almost smiled at the diplomatic language. What Zeltar wasn't saying directly was that the aliens were terrified of humanity now. They had asked for help and received it, but they had also learned that their peaceful civilization shared the galaxy with a species that considered planetary bombardment and suicide attacks to be routine military tactics. Perhaps I suggested Representative Korthaks of the Andorian Trade Coalition. We could discuss some form of arms limitation treaty. Surely the humans can understand the need for restraint in military development. The suggestion was met with murmurs of agreement from several alien delegates. Sarah had been expecting this. The galaxy wanted to go back to their comfortable illusions about civilized warfare and acceptable losses. With respect, Sarah replied, humanity has no interest in limiting our military capabilities to make other species feel more comfortable about their own military weaknesses. The blunt response caused several delegates to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Villani of the Scientific Council spoke up next. Admiral Chen, surely you must understand our concerns. Your species' approach to warfare is unprecedented in galactic history. The use of weapons that ignore shielding, ramming attacks, boarding parties, fighting in vacuum. These tactics could be turned against peaceful worlds just as easily as against machine intelligences. Sarah looked around the room at the assembled aliens. These were the representatives of civilizations that had survived for thousands of years by avoiding conflict and maintaining careful balances of power. They had no framework for understanding a species that approached every threat as an extinction event. You're worried about the wrong thing, she told them. You should be asking yourselves what other threats are out there that your civilized military forces can't handle. The Korthak weren't unique. They were just the first existential threat you encountered that didn't play by your rules. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's spiral arms. According to our deep space sensors, there are at least 12 other regions where we're detecting unusual energy signatures and expansion patterns. Some of them might be natural phenomena. Others might be threats even worse than the swarm. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy's peaceful age might be ending, and the elegant energy weapons and formation tactics that had served them for millennia might not be enough for what was coming. Commander Morrison, who had joined the diplomatic mission as Sarah's military advisor, spoke up from his position near the back of the room. The Admiral is right. We've spent the last 6 months analyzing what we learned from the Korthak campaign. Machine intelligences like the swarm represent just one category of galactic threat. There could be hive minds, energy beings, species from parallel dimensions, or things we don't even have names for yet. And you believe humanity is prepared for such threats? Asked Ambassador Zeltar. We're more prepared than anyone else, Sarah replied honestly. Not because we're smarter or more advanced, but because we're used to fighting for our survival. Earth taught us to assume that everything in the universe is trying to kill us and plan accordingly. She gestured to the tactical display still showing the aftermath of the swarm campaign. When you called for help, you got exactly what humanity always provides: complete commitment to solving the problem permanently. We didn't come to your aid planning to minimize casualties or limit collateral damage. We came to end the threat completely, whatever it cost. Representative Korthaks tried again to push for some form of military restrictions. Surely there must be some way to coordinate our defensive efforts without resorting to such extreme measures. Sarah stood up, indicating that the diplomatic portion of the meeting was essentially over. Here's what humanity is offering the galaxy, she said. Earth will maintain a rapid response fleet in interstellar space. When the next existential threat appears, and it will appear, you can call on us again. We'll respond with everything we have and we'll solve the problem permanently. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. But we won't be joining your council, we won't be following your rules of engagement, and we won't be limiting our military capabilities to make you feel safer. Earth stands ready to defend organic life in this galaxy, but we'll do it on our terms. As Sarah and her delegation prepared to leave, Ambassador Zeltar approached her privately. What you've done for the galaxy. We can never repay that debt. he said quietly. But I have to ask, what happens if humanity itself becomes a threat to galactic peace? Sarah considered the question seriously. It was a fair concern from their perspective. Then I suppose the galaxy will have to find someone even more dangerous than us to stop us, she replied. But I'd recommend hoping it doesn't come to that. Because if humanity ever does become an existential threat to the galaxy, we'll be much harder to stop than the Korthak swarm. As the human delegation returned to their ships, Zeltar began composing his report to the galactic database. The entry would become one of the most accessed files in Council history. Species, human. Homeworld, Earth. Sol system. Classification, ally. Extreme caution advised. Military capability, overwhelming. Diplomatic status, independent. Warning level, do not provoke under any circumstances. He paused, then added a final note. Observations. When Deathworlders answer a call for help, they don't just save you from the immediate threat. They rewrite the fundamental rules of how conflicts are resolved in the galaxy. Recommendation. Maintain positive relations at all costs. If another existential threat emerges, humanity remains our best hope for survival. If humanity itself ever becomes a threat, recommend immediate evacuation of the galaxy. The file was marked with the highest security clearance and distributed to every government in the Council. The message was clear. The galaxy had new protectors, and they were both the most dangerous and most reliable allies anyone had ever encountered. In the depths of space, the human rapid response fleet began its patrol of the galactic arms, watching for the next threat that would require the unique problem-solving methods that only Deathworlders could provide.